I am Whitney Richardson, the Illinois Power Agency's Legislative Affairs Manager. We're so glad that you can join us today for the third session in the inaugural IPA Summer School Virtual Lunch and Learn for Legislators and Staff series, an educational webinar series for legislators, government leaders, and team members to learn more about the IPA's programs and initiatives pertinent to your work as legislators and point persons for constituents across the state. As those of you who have attended previous sessions know, this year's IPA Summer School was designed as a four-part series. Today's session, Session 3, will cover the equity initiatives that make up part of the agency's work in the clean energy transition. In 2 weeks, Session 4 will provide a sneak peek into the soon-to-be-published Clean Energy Dashboard, and will discuss the IPA's progress toward achieving clean energy goals. Previously, in July, we discussed the 2 IPA-administered solar incentive programs, and in August, we explored the consumer protections built into both programs. Both the recordings and decks for the previous sessions are now posted to the series registration page under the previous sessions heading. Today's session is an educational forum, and the presentation portion will be recorded for future use. The presentation does not represent a legal interpretation. We'll reserve a few minutes at the end of today's session to respond to any general questions related to today's topic. The question and answer portion will not be recorded. I will now turn the floor over to the IPA's director, Brian Granahan, to further discuss the Illinois Power Agency and its equity responsibilities in the clean energy transition. Over to you, Brian.
Great. Thank you so much, Whitney. And thanks to everybody who took the time out of their day to be here today. We know there's a lot going on, and obviously right after a holiday. And thanks for taking the time to learn more about the IPA and about our work. So just some brief background before we get into the substance of the conversation. For those who aren't familiar, the Illinois Power Agency is an independent state agency, and we're responsible for implementation of the state's renewable portfolio standard. And that ties back to a lot of the equity initiatives that we'll be talking about during today's webinar. As part of the RPS implementation, we administer 2 solar incentive programs, Illinois Shines and Illinois Solar for All. If you haven't yet, you can go back and watch the first episode of this series that we did that was about those programs. And then a lot of our clean energy work incorporates different equity provisions. That's the subject of today's presentation. All of this is intended to take us to a place where we're meeting 40% renewables by 2030, 50% by 2040. At the IPA, we're responsible for the implementation of these initiatives. So what distinguishes us from the ICC is, while the ICC is more adjudicatory and regulatory in nature, the IPA is a place where a lot of these initiatives are ultimately implemented, and we administer those programs and procurements to try to get more renewable energy online. A lot of the initiatives that we're talking about today, although not all of them, came through the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act passed in 2021. And to give you some sense of how it is that we can help shape the clean energy economy in a way that better reflects equity principles, it's because of those purse strings. So our carrots are basically the incentives that we provide back for the development of new renewable energy projects, and our stick is just the ability to withhold those incentives. We don't have the ability to issue fines or revoke business licenses, but we can bar entities that don't comply with certain requirements from participating in our programs and procurements. And that's how we operate as an agency to try to then help shape the clean energy economy in a way that reflects principles of equity as demonstrated through CEJA. And in terms of the specifics of those, we'll get into that through the course of today's presentation, and then we'll have time to take any questions that you have toward the end.
Thank you, Brian. Next slide, please. I'd now like to introduce you to our main speakers for today's program. First, we'll hear from Tanvi Shah, the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer of the Illinois Power Agency. Tanvi joined the agency in 2023. In this role, she oversees the implementation of new diversity and equity requirements and opportunities for the IPA's renewable energy procurements and programs. We will also hear from Jennifer Schmidt, Senior Program Manager for the IPA's Illinois Solar for All program, who is responsible for the day-to-day management of this program. Next slide. In part 1, Tanvi will begin by discussing the agency's commitment to equity, and then discuss the agency's initiatives under the Equity Accountability System. In part 2, Jennifer will discuss equity initiatives within the Illinois Solar for All incentive program administered by the agency. Again, we'll have several minutes following the recorded portion of today's webinar for general questions related to today's topic. I will now turn the floor over to Tanvi.
Thank you, Whitney. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you could join us today, and I'm excited to share with you the agency's equity initiatives and the progress we've made on them over the past year. So a little bit of background. So the IPA is committed to advancing equity in the clean energy transition based on mandates outlined in the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, CEJA. And this legislation introduced substantial changes aimed at expanding renewable energy adoption across the state, as well as promoting equity in the clean energy sector. Specifically, it strengthened the equity and diversity requirements for IPA-administered incentive programs and procurements. And it vastly grew the agency's responsibilities and work. And really, the goal of this is to ensure that across the scope of our programs and procurements, that entities that are participating are really focusing on the use of contractors and individuals that will help increase the diversity of the industry. And the goal of the system is to advance equity by providing access to clean energy economy for businesses and workers from communities that have been excluded from economic opportunities in the energy sector, that have faced a disproportionate level of pollution, or that have disproportionately experienced the negative public health outcomes. So on the next slide, you'll see that the equity accountability system is really an umbrella term, and it really references all of the IPA CEJA-related equity responsibilities. And so these include a minimum equity standard that is applicable to the project workforce for companies that participate in IPA's programs and procurements. There's also a dedicated category in our Illinois Shines program that is reserved for projects that are submitted by EEC equity eligible contractors. Additionally, it is also, it offers an advance of capital to help with project development for those equity eligible contractors. There is a bid selection preference for a larger utility scale solar and wind projects that commit to using a higher percentage of equity eligible contractors or equity eligible persons in their project construction. And then finally, the equity accountability system also has some data and reporting requirements, as well as the development of an equity portal or database in which the agency can help support the sector by connecting clean energy companies with equity eligible persons. So before we dive into each of those components of the EAS, on the next slide, I'd like to talk through a couple of the definitions, just so we're all grounded in the same language as we move forward through this presentation. So the first one is the definition of an equity eligible person. This is the person that would most benefit from equitable investments by the state that are designed to combat discrimination. And so how do you become an equity eligible person? Well, there are 4 ways that you can qualify. If you are someone who is a graduate or a participant of one of the DCEO administered job training programs that are listed on the slide there, or if you're someone who is currently or was previously in the foster care system, if you are an individual who's formerly incarcerated, or if you're someone who resides in one of the equity investment eligible communities. So on the next slide, equity investment eligible communities. What we mean when we refer to these communities is really, again, these are the communities that the state believes would most benefit from equity investments that are designed to combat discrimination. And so there are 2 primary areas that make up the equity investment eligible communities. One is our 3 areas, and these come from the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, where residents have historically been excluded from economic opportunities. And the second are environmental justice communities that are identified by the Illinois Power Agency, and these are where residents have historically been subject to disproportionate levels of pollution. So there's one more concept that we'll move into, and that's the equity eligible contractor on the next slide. Okay, and so an equity eligible contractor is really just a business that is majority owned by equity eligible persons. It could also be a nonprofit or cooperative that's majority governed by equity eligible persons, or an individual who is an equity eligible person that is offering personal services as an independent contractor. So knowing these 3 definitions, let's move into the equity accountability system and some of the components. So the first we'll talk about is the equity eligible contractors. And equity eligible contractors are approved vendors, designees, and subcontractors that registered in the Illinois Shines program, and they meet the equity eligible person criteria. And so one of the benefits of being an equity eligible contractor is the ability to access an advance of capital. And this is an effort on the part of CEJA to recognize that there are financial barriers that EECs often face. And so this incentive ensures that contractors that demonstrate that they have a need have access to the necessary funds so that they can also participate in renewable energy projects. And so we reduce the upfront financial constraints and allow a more level playing field for newer and smaller entities to enter this sector. On the next page, you'll see the other part of the EAS is the equity eligible contractor category of our Illinois Shines program. And what this is a specific project category that is reserved for equity eligible contractors. And it provides them with dedicated, in addition to offering EECs an ability to participate in this category, the Illinois Shines program has also developed a host of resources to support EECs that are trying to enter the space. There is a mentorship program that's been developed. There's a dedicated sector strategist who can work with EECs to help them navigate the process of registering in the program. There's one-on-one support and office hours, as well as opportunities to offer feedback through roundtables and trainings and other events. And so our goal here is to really support EECs in order to enter the space, participate in our programs, and really thrive in the sector. And on this next slide here, you'll see the sort of core component of the equity accountability system, which is the minimum equity standard. This is sort of central to the equity accountability system because it helps ensure that the growing clean energy economy is accessible to everyone and has fair representation of EEPs and EECs. Under the minimum equity standard, we allot a minimum percentage of the project workforce for participating projects to be consistent of EEPs and EECs. And so this percentage is going to grow over time. Currently, it is at 10% for this next program year, but by 2030, we want this percentage of the project workforce to increase all the way to 30%. And you can see our proposed schedule increases right there on the little chart. The goal of this is to really ensure that entities that are participating in our program are encouraged to use EEPs and EECs in these projects and thereby diversify sort of the workforce and the participants in the clean energy sector. One additional component of the equity accountability system is the equity bid adjustment process for our utility scale projects. And what this is that the IPA has developed a bid evaluation requirements that favor, and this ensures that these large-scale projects also contribute to the state's equity goals. On the next slide here, you can see one component of the EAS is the energy online portal that the IPA was directed to create, in which we provide information on the equitable workforce transition for approved vendors, potential EEPs, and the public at large. And so this portal includes employment opportunities for EEPs and EECs. The goal is to connect clean energy companies with potential EEPs that are looking for work in the sector. It also provides an online application to be certified as an EEP. There's a list of EEPs that are currently looking for employment that is visible to verified employers. Hi, folks. I'm sorry, I'm getting a note that my sound might be coming in and out. I'm going to turn off my camera and see if that helps. Okay, keep going here. In addition, the equity portal also provides training and other resources for individuals and companies in the space, as well as a map of the equity investment eligible communities. So the portal is really a host of resources for the sector at large. On the next slide, you'll get to see what the portal looks like. And this is an overview of the homepage of the portal. We've tried to keep it simple and clear. And so if you're here as an employer or a job seeker, there are two paths you can take to access the resources that would be most pertinent to you. If we were to click on the job seeker end, you could see the list of resources that are available to job seekers. So they can understand, they can look for jobs in the sector, they can register as an EEP, as well as access training resources, or see a list of companies that are involved in the clean energy sector. On the next slide, you can see the resources that we've developed for employers. And here you'll see they can post jobs, see a list of equity eligible persons. And again, they can also access funding resources and other resources that can support their businesses. And in addition to the resources listed there on the equity portal, we also have documented all of the updates and refinements that we have made to the portal, and they're documented in our assessment of the equity accountability system. And so you're welcome to take a look at those, and we continue to iterate and improve the portal based on feedback that we receive from stakeholders. And as always, we also welcome questions or feedback on the portal. And so we've listed our email address that's dedicated to the portal. Please feel free to share that with any individuals that might be interested in asking questions or getting more information about the portal and the resources listed there. On this next slide here, you can see we've tracked all of the registrations of EEPs since the portal launched. And you can see that the equity portal has seen substantial utilization and sort of a steady increase of EEP registrations since it launched in January of last year. And through this chart, you can also note that actually, I believe this chart ends in June, and since then we've actually seen an additional 300 EEP applications come through the portal. And so we're seeing steady growth, but also sort of rapid growth happening as more companies hear about the portal, more individuals hear about the EEP designation and are signing up. And so that growth is encouraging. And on the next slide here, you'll get to see a breakdown of who exactly are the EEPs that we have registered. So the EP registration data from the portal really shows insights on the diversity of the individuals that are participating in the clean energy sector. And so we have a total of 443 EPs registered at the time of this graphics development. And what we can see is that there are some differences in both gender and racial and ethnic representation. Overall, the pool of EEPs is fairly diverse, though there are some imbalances in both gender and race. The high participation of African American and Hispanic individuals is really encouraging for promoting diversity in the clean energy sector. But we do see the gender disparity points to sort of a continuing challenge that we've seen and more work on our part to do more outreach to these individuals. On the next slide, we'll see a list of companies that have registered on the portal. And even here, you can see the sort of a steady rise as more companies hear about the portal and use it as a resource to recruit EEPs. On the next slide, thank you. So one other area of work that the DEI Bureau and the agency has prioritized is really to conduct outreach to minority business associations and organizations. Now, our goal here is to really increase access to our work by educating others on these opportunities through our Illinois Shines program and our Illinois Solar for All programs, but also to better understand the EEP and EEC designations and having more folks understand that and then register where possible. We also want to increase the visibility of the portal, and so we want to connect with clean energy companies to ensure that they see this as a resource, and also give us feedback so we can improve it and make it more relevant to the sector. And finally, our outreach efforts are also to build relationships with community-based organizations and other stakeholders in, in the equity communities that we are trying to target. We have a couple of photos of some of the outreach events that we've attended over the past year. And on the next slide, I think we have some of the materials that we've developed for the portal. And we have some of these materials available in Spanish as well, so that this information is more accessible to all individuals. And then finally, on the next slide, you can see we are planning a small and emerging business hub, which will be a sort of an expansion of our equity portal. This hub is really designed to share information to small and emerging businesses in the clean energy market, share information about how they can start and grow their businesses, what are the certifications they may need, where they can connect with the workforce, what are other supportive services or business counseling that's available to them. So there's a host of resources that the agency has collected and compiled on this in this hub, and we plan to launch it fairly soon. And so we hope that this would be another resource that will support the field, and particularly small and emerging businesses as they navigate the site. And then finally, another component of the system is the data collection and reporting requirements that were embedded in the system. And so specifically, the agency was directed to expand our data collection efforts to ensure that there's transparency and accountability in the growing clean energy economy, and really to collect and share more data about what is happening in the sector. And so we have grown to collect more information on demographic and geographic attributes of our project workforce and in our programs. And, additionally, we are reporting annually on this data so we can track how we're doing. And specifically, after the first year of implementation of the equity accountability system, we just released part 1 of our equity accountability system assessment. And this was a report that we've developed to share insights about what has happened in the first year of implementation of the system. We look into several of the key areas I mentioned earlier. We look at MES compliance. We look at the EEC project category. We look at our competitive procurements, as well as the equity portal and sort of the work we've done through the portal. And in a few months, we plan to release part 2 of the assessment. We're still waiting on year-end data that was filed in mid-July. And so once we receive that data and review it, we will release part 2 of the assessment, in which we will talk further about whether or not companies were able to meet that minimum equity standard, how many companies needed waivers, what the workforce demographics are of the individuals that were hired, and any other information that we're able to collect in order to give a full picture of how the equity accountability system is doing. And then finally, there's one other study that we plan to conduct, and we are currently in the process of launching that study. So this is the racial disparity study. We are going to be partnering with DCEO and Department of Labor to commission and conduct a study that is going to measure the presence and impact of discrimination on minority workers and businesses in Illinois. And so this is really studying more than the IPA's programs and procurements, but looking at the sector as a whole to understand where there may be issues of disparities in the sector. And if they are, putting together some recommendations of how we can address those disparities. And so the goal again is to really ensure that through all of this data collection, analysis, and reporting, that the benefits of the clean energy economy are equitably distributed across the state. For the equity accountability system assessment, you can access part 1 on our website. It's linked right here. And as I mentioned, part 2 will dive deeper into the year-end data that we are hoping to receive soon. On the next slide, this is the racial disparity study, as I mentioned. And so you all know the racial disparity study, we have currently released a request for qualifications. And we've identified several firms that are that meet the qualifications and will be then invited to submit a proposal to conduct the racial disparity study. And so once we've identified the final firm, that study will get off the ground. And then finally, to share a little bit about the agency. So one effort we've made since the start of these CJA responsibilities is for the IPA to work closely with DCAO. We want to make sure that we are partnering closely with that agency. So since we both have responsibilities as it relates to CJA implementation, to ensure that we are well aligned and not duplicating work, and ensuring that the experience for users participating in our programs or DCO's programs have the best possible experience, because these agencies are speaking and making sure that we are consistent in how we are implementing our equity initiatives, but also that we are addressing for issues, trouble spots, and other areas of concern, and collaborating internally behind the scenes to make sure that the experience for individuals in the sector is as smooth as we can make it. And so while the IPA does not administer the CJA job training programs, we work very closely with DCO to ensure that as they get these programs off the ground, we can provide input and share data and make sure that these two agencies are as aligned as they can be. Okay, and with that, I will pass it back to Whitney.
Thank you so much. We will switch over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Tanvi. So my name is Jennifer Schmidt. I'm the Senior Program Manager of the Illinois Solar for All program. The IPA has tried to make equity foundational to the implementation of Illinois Solar for All, with many of the efforts that I'm going to discuss today being implemented since the beginning of the program and then expanded with the passage of CJA. In Illinois Solar for All, we don't believe that equity just means getting affordable solar to income-eligible residents and their service providers around the state. But as Tanvi discussed in her first slide, we believe that equity includes the IPA's commitment to advancing equity in the clean energy transition as a whole. So we try to make sure that we are considering equitable access throughout various parts of Illinois Solar for All. In the next few slides, I'll get into details of how we're striving for that through our eligibility criteria, our grassroots education programming, specific sub-program initiatives, project selection scoring, supporting approved vendors and designees, as well as support and workshops for small and emerging businesses that are trying to participate in Illinois Solar for All. Next slide. So the eligibility criteria for Illinois Solar for All, we serve two distinct groups. First are income eligible households, and we define income eligible households as households with an income 80% or below of the area median income. We do have an income verification process for income certification, and we do try to make sure that we have a variety of options for customers to complete that income verification, so that we're making that as small of a barrier to participation as possible. So trying to make sure there are various options for customers to prove their income eligibility. And then we also have nonprofit and public facilities that are located in environmental justice communities or income eligible communities. And these, in order to be eligible, they have to be critical service providers for income eligible residents of their community. Next slide. So this is just some data of how Illinois Solar for All has been doing as far as projects that are cited in income eligible communities. And so we define income eligible communities as community census tracts where at least half of the residents are income eligible. So at least half of the residents of that census tract are 80% of AMI or under. And so you can see we've done a very good job of making sure that our projects are reaching income eligible communities. I did double check those first year one and year two numbers that yes, actually that we did reach 99 and 100% of our projects located in income eligible communities those years. So we've been doing a great job of getting out into income eligible communities, and now we're starting to see projects in other areas of the state as well. Next slide. So we also prioritize projects that are located in environmental justice communities. We have a carve out that I'll be talking about in a little bit. That's we have a goal of at least 25% of our incentives being for projects that are cited in environmental justice communities. And you can see how we're doing on that goal. We've been able to meet that goal so far. And so, you know, we're making sure that we are that Illinois Solar for All is reaching vulnerable communities around the state. Next slide. So this is a very distant view of our environmental justice map. As I mentioned, we have a 25% carve out of Illinois Solar for All funds that should be going to projects that are cited in environmental justice communities. And we have a methodology of how we determine the income eligible communities in Illinois. You can see that in orange, these are income eligible communities that are designated through our calculated criteria. And then in blue, those are communities that are self-designated in EJ communities. So we have a process that allows communities whose local conditions may not be accurately represented by the data that we have that we use to calculate our environmental justice communities. So we have this self-designation process that communities can utilize if they believe that their community should be designated as an EJ community, but may not have, but maybe the data didn't reflect that. So we have this process where the community can say, you know, these are the conditions in our community that might not be represented in the data. And then we have a committee that evaluates those requests. Next slide. So we also have a component of Illinois Solar for All for grassroots educators. So these are nonprofits that are trusted members of their communities. These are very hyper local neighborhood level nonprofits that have deep roots and that their staff are members of the community. So we're really trying to make sure that we're reaching that these subcontractors, these organizations are trusted and already have deep connections to their community. These entities are contracted to conduct grassroots education campaigns to educate income eligible residents about Illinois Solar for All. So we really try to make sure that they are our local representatives of the program. So they, in their campaigns, we have a variety of options for the grassroots educators to shape their campaigns with different focuses. This includes solar education, being trusted source of information on solar for all in the Illinois solar market. They can help a customer through the process of participating in Illinois Solar for All. They can engage community members in stakeholder feedback processes that the IPA is holding. And they can also promote opportunities for community members to engage with social training programs. So one campaign is probably not going to be doing all of these, but different grassroots education campaigns are going to be having different focuses that are suited to their local communities. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, we do have some carve-outs in our funding to make sure that the funding is reaching communities. We have a 5% of the program funding as a whole can be used for grassroots education efforts. And then of that 5% funding for grassroots education efforts, up to 60% of the budget can focus on environmental justice communities. And just to give some example of how we're doing with that, in the last cohort, we had 70% of our campaign focus in environmental justice communities. So we're really trying to make sure that we're not just meeting those environmental justice goals, but we are trying to exceed them. So can we go back a slide real quick? So one other new facet of Illinois Solar for All with CEJA is the idea of energy sovereignty, which is promoting ownership and local community wealth building from the projects. We want to make sure that these customers are seeing benefits beyond just the electricity cost savings by promoting a path to ownership. And so we make sure that that includes the right to decision making over governance, maintenance, and the use of the system and facilities. Next slide. So this slide shows our progress with the energy sovereignty project carve-outs. So we only started tracking energy sovereignty projects in program year 5. So that's why the first 4 years don't show any energy sovereignty projects. There are some projects that have ownership business models in years 1 through 4, but we don't technically consider those energy sovereignty projects. But in program year 5, we had 38% of our projects featuring energy sovereignty, and that went up to 39% in this past program year that just finished in May. Next slide. So then we also believe that it's important for our program administrator to support the approved vendors and designees that are participating in Illinois Solar for All. So we recognize that we have more stringent guidelines and requirements to participate in Illinois Solar for All. And we make sure that there is one-on-one support with members of our AV management team to support those vendors. And then we also have a small and emerging business initiative that I think a couple of, one of Tanvi's slides showed some events, and one of those was one of our small and emerging business events that Elevate had held. So some additional support that the Small and Emerging Business Initiative provides. They do a program overview, help the business to register with the program, both Illinois Shines and Illinois Solar for All. They provide guidance on program resources. They help the business network and find referrals and support. And then they also make sure that these vendors are understanding the program requirements. So they want to participate in the program, but we want to make sure that they are participating in the program and getting started understanding what the requirements are. And so Elevate has also been holding some workshops to help small and emerging business leaders understand those gaps and better engage with the growing Illinois solar market. Next slide. And so we also make sure through our project selection scoring that anytime we have more interest in a sub-program than what there's available funding for, that we are selecting projects that best align with the goals of Illinois Solar for All. So we award additional points during project selection to eligible projects that are located in income eligible communities, located in environmental justice communities, promoting energy sovereignty, and then projects that are developed by minority and women-owned business enterprises, approved vendors that are utilizing MWBE subcontractors. So just making sure that any chance that we have when there is more project submission than available funding, that we're making sure that those projects that are being approved best represent the goals of Illinois Solar for All. Next slide. So I think that leads us to our Q&A, and I will turn it back over to Whitney.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you, Tanvi, as well. This concludes the recorded portion of today's session. I'm turning off the recording.